So during the Samanvaya Freedom Lecture, we kind of invited grassroots workers in the domain of agriculture, in the domain of social work, in several sectors, invited them to come and talk about what is their idea of freedom. What does freedom mean to them? And then we also had a celebrity from the city to come and introduce these people. So the celebrity doesn't talk. The celebrity's job is to introduce. And then it's a grassroots worker, it's a teacher from a village or somebody from a farming background, somebody who is a village a herbal healer. These people come and talk. So this we had done for nearly 2 decades, and it was a popular event during that phase when people went out and participated. So uh, that was the Samanvaya Freedom Lecture series. So this year we decided let's call for a dialogue around ethics because we had spoken about AI and ethics a couple of years ago. Venky and Professor Gray and Bhaskar were all part of that particular dialogue process. Now, with the kind of changes that are happening in the last several months, I would say, writing anything about this subject itself is to be outdated by the time you finish a sentence. And you are almost continuously being bombarded with news. And there is a lot of anxiety, but there is also a lot of promises. Often the promises sound like they're based upon hypothetical benefits, even as people are fiddling around with it and finding some interesting benefits, tangible benefits as well. While on the other side, you find the anxieties growing by the day, and they doesn't seem to be addressed by anyone specifically. The potential is really exciting. The resource utilization is one of the scariest part is the resource utilization. Already we are seeing the kind of protest that is going on in the US and in the Indian context, the even protest videos about the Google's data center in Visakhapatnam have a takedown order from the government. Government is worried about reels made by locals on the data center. Then you have the job takeover, which sounds alarming in terms of how many jobs will be lost, etc. And these are coming not from people who are alarmists or people who are conspiracy theorists. These are coming from the promoters of the technology themselves. And they are not saying it because they want to scare somebody. They are saying it because that is the way they will reap benefits from this technology. They are saying every human being will have to be replaced. Then the threats that are already experienced, we have seen the threat directly in terms of the war situation and how it is used in destructive spaces. Unending daily news cycles, almost we are debating the competitive advantages of corporates like never before. I don't think competitive challenges between two corporates ever became a global news as between OpenAI and Anthropic. It has been debated in media day in and day out, as though it is what the entire world is going to be dependent upon. Then the tech development that is relentless. Recently, when Elon Musk was asked by the Economist editor as to how frequently do you need to check in with your competitors if you were to bring in a challenge, and when he said sometimes on the same day there are more than two or three major milestones being crossed, so we need to check in at least twice a week. He was barely giving an indication of how frequently things are changing around in this technology. Like I said, competition seems to be highly misplaced in the context of all these impacts that are happening. Uh, Whether government should be handling it and there should be so much of competition itself be regulating or self-regulating competition. seems to be highly misplaced. And in the middle of all this, my niece is writing an essay competition this afternoon in her school called How AI Will Contribute to the Vision of Viksit Bharat in India in 1947 and 2047. So, on the one side, you have all of these debates going on. On the other side, you have schools and colleges advertising relentlessly, and governments talking about how much of AI is being used by them. And kids being asked to imagine how AI will. I mean, she's grade seven, and in grade seven, she's now being asked to write an essay how this is going to benefit all of India into Viksit Bharat. So it's the irony is endless almost. And so it is in this context that we decided why not start this dialogue. Uh, so some basic rules. We have a few recommended reading and uh, um, four fantastic recorded videos that I have already sent to all of you. I do hope you would get to see. I mean, Sriramji is here today, but others, there have been two or three other videos that have been recorded. Some of them will join for the later sessions, but it will be important that people get a view of things there. There is a panel in each one of these sessions. I have normally comfortable with a smaller crowd, but the interest in this subject has meant that there is a reasonably large number. I don't know how many people have already logged in. So there has been nearly 60 plus registrations that were taking place. So I was not sure how many will log in and be on time. But we will ask people to first share their opinion, and subsequently we'll get into taking dialogue forward. Chat box, meanwhile, people can use liberally in terms of putting in their comments and their typing their responses. We intend to have on the fourth session, the fourth Saturday of this week, we intend to have a detailed interaction with everybody who participated. So that will be open for a lot more dialogue. In case something gets missed out, please don't worry. We will try to take it up in the last session. There is a plan for doing a few online workshops on some of these subjects because others have so far told me that there are some subjects in which there could be a possibility of doing more workshops as possible. So we'll keep coming to that during the course of the session today also. So just to give an outline of the four subjects, most of you have already seen this. Today we will limit ourselves to ethics, philosophy, and epistemology. We'll get into other things as we move forward. So today we have Sriram, who's our yoga teacher, Yogacharya, as prefer to call, because he is uh, followed by, I know, several leading yoga teachers here, and his visit here and his programs here are seen with a lot of expectation. And I had done a very interesting interview with him where he had outlined the Sankhya Yoga view of what is intelligence, and in that context, how to look at AI. Professor Gray is joining us from COA in Maine, the US. Gray and myself, we have been collaborating on several of these dialogues. And so, welcome, Gray, for joining from Maine, where it must be very early morning. And I have Venky, who is co-conspirator of various kinds, co-initiator, and one of the most, I would say, deeply restful, but at the same time, restless mind that is trying to do a lot of things around agriculture and technology with quite a lot of entrepreneurs. So these three people have agreed to be in the panel today, but there are others who are joining us today who would be contributing also, I hope. So with those words, I will pause now, and I deliberately wanted to pause at this point with a white screen so that we can take a deep breath and kind of get ready to understand a lot more on this subject. And I would request Gray to start off the session. And stop my screen for the moment. Please feel free to join and with your videos, etc. Thank you. Over to you, Gray.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Ram. I'm really honored and delighted for this opportunity for dialogue with the folks, most of you who are based in India. Just briefly, I'm a Quaker. I'm based in the United States in College Atlantic, as Ram mentioned, which is a small school that approaches education in a human ecological way, very interdisciplinary team approach to learning and one that emphasizes sort of connecting um, things going on within academia and the rest of the world. So sort of breaking down the walls.
Gray, your voice is a bit feeble.
Okay, sorry. Maybe I'll try and speak a little bit louder.
Yes,
Thank you
that'll
for
be
the
better.
feedback.
Now it's fine.
Okay, this is the volume. Okay, good. Yeah, so I teach at a school for human ecology. I'm a Quaker, and a lot of my early research, I was trained as a philosopher, and but I'm very interested in lots of outreach and for me, human ecology involves both transdisciplinary approaches to the world and ones that integrate theory and practice. And um, and a lot of my early work was focused on peace studies, very influenced by Gandhi and all the kinds of innovations that have arisen, especially in the last 50 years, in mediation, negotiation, conflict transformation, and so on. And I bring all that to thinking about AI and the ethical issues and policy questions that it raises. Today, I wanted to share sort of four things. One is a sort of approach to dealing with the kinds of accelerating change that Ram already mentioned, and I'll do that in part by sharing a song. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about visions and different ways of understanding what a vision is as it guides us into this future, and then share a particular vision of a wiser Earth. That would be one sort of approach. And then talk just a little bit more about the accelerating changes and the challenges they present, and finally some next steps, some strategies that we might have for dealing with them. So to start off, with all this accelerating change, it's like many people are feeling that kind of feeling. Um, I tried to start, and I'm still advocating for what I might call a slow zoom movement. Um, and I have a song about this, but first I just want to explain the idea of slow zoom, which arose in the COVID era. Um, you know, in Italy, when McDonald's and other kinds of fast foods came in, many people would sort of say something like, "That is not a food," right? Okay. And they started the slow food movement, which many of you may be familiar with. The core idea being that when we eat, we should chew mindfully, thinking about how the food was prepared and where it came from and who grew it and what the social conditions were and so on. And this kind of approach to thinking mindfully about our nourishment as we take it in um, is one we can also bring to thinking about the consumption of digital resources, whether they're through Zoom or computers in other contexts or iPhones. Um, so how can we have a slow Zoom movement, you know? And part of that involves the way we may benevolently gaze at each other and quietly start a meeting on Zoom, for example. And part of it has to do with the way we use sound and think about it and get attuned in vibrations. For me, when I think about AI, I get so excited that I need to slow down. And so here's a song that I've written to sort of share that at least helps me slow down and may help you as well. Mm. Oh, 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 I'm gonna slow right down. Yes. So I can get there sooner. Oh, I'm gonna slow right down so I can get there today. I'm gonna slow right down. Maybe even come to a full stop. Oh, maybe if I come to a full stop, I'm gonna get there right away. Yes. There's a saying that if we want to get somewhere fast, go alone, but that if you want to go far, you should travel together. And it seems to me that with the issues that AI is presenting, we're going to have to go very far, and we're going to have to go together. And slowing down and entering into dialogue and drawing on everyone's intelligence to try and arrive at a kind of collaborative wisdom is going to be an essential part of the whole process. In terms of visions about AI, you know, there are dreams and then there are nightmares. There's the dream that if anyone builds it, we will all thrive because it will become so intelligent, so much more intelligent than us, that it'll figure out all our problems and make the world perfect. And on the other hand, there's the dream that is really a nightmare, that if anyone builds it, this super intelligence, this intelligence that's more powerful than any human or even all of us together collectively, if anyone builds it, then we'll all die because it will have values different than ours, not aligned with us, and we'll just be in its way, and it will push us aside as it pursues its own goals of exploring the universe and traveling beyond and leaving the earth behind as a kind of springboard and a waste dump. Those kinds of dreams and nightmares often are rooted in a kind of technological determinism that assumes that the future is a kind of fate that awaits us and that we must accept. But they also assume that the technology exists just as a thing in itself, as a thing, whereas in fact, technologies always already exist as a part of a community, as a socio-technical system. And the way in which you use, for example, the hardware and software that might be on a computer somewhere is affected by the community where it's used. The same hardware and software in Meta Facebook will behave differently than in Wikipedia as a community, for example. So the question is, how can we view the future not as a fabric laid out for us that we just have to let unroll, but as a loom, as something that we can weave on in creating the social technical system where the community ware is just as important as the hardware and software. And the one kind of step towards that is to think about it not just as a loom, but actually as not a mechanical future and structure for it, but more as an organic thing. That the future is more like a garden in which we're going to be trying out many different kinds of plants and animals and microorganisms, and they're going to be co-evolving with us. And the dreams that motivate individuals and communities and villages and panchayats and and international organizations all are going to be co-evolving in this kind of big garden that the Earth offers us as a very wondrous and remarkable place in this part of the universe. One kind of dream that people have been promoting for some time that can lead either to them to adopt the dream or the nightmare vision is what's referred to as a smarter planet. And it's the idea that is rooted in a particular conception of rationality and intelligence that grows out of an engineering, mathematics, science, technology tradition of the sort that the people who have been creating most of the innovations in AI grew up in their own education. It's a vision of knowledge in which knowledge is power, and to deploy it, you need one or a few key goals, and then you use calculation to calculate how you can optimize the achievement of that one or a few goals. And so people try to create, not just smart cars and smartphones that get us somewhere faster or communicate more inexpensively, but smart schools that raise test scores, or smart farms that produce more rice per hectare, or smart bombs or smart battlefields that achieve some one or a few goals. The problem with this smarter planet vision of the future and the conception of intelligence that involves is that all these systems, farms and schools and so on, they have lots of functions. Farms don't just produce rice. They feed into aquifers that provide us with water to drink. They're part of the carbon cycle in which oxygen is created for us to breathe. They provide habitat for pollinators. They provide places where people can work and live out their cultural traditions. There are all sorts of functions they serve. And the same is true of schools and other life systems that AI is increasingly entering into. And so what we want is not just a smart system that achieves one or a few goals at an optimal or maximal level. We want a way of engaging with all the stakeholders and all the intelligences involved in a way that integrates them in a balanced way. We want to take all these values and goals and preferences and concerns into account in what we could call not just smarter, but wiser way. And so this is at the core of this idea that I want to suggest to you of what we should be working for is a wiser Earth, right? And what would that mean? Well, the kind of reasoning involved in seeking wisdom of that sort is one where you don't just start with one set of assumptions and then use linear inference to arrive at a conclusion. Instead, you start with two or more people and points of view that don't agree on their assumptions. They don't agree on the way they define terms, and they don't even see the world in the same way. One may walk into a forest and say, wow, look at all these board feet of lumber. I can't wait to harvest them. And the other walks in, and what they see is, wow, look at all this bird habitat that I'd like to conserve, right? That's the starting point for dialogical reasoning. It doesn't just start with one point of view in a monological way, but starts with two or more and tries to take all the different values into account. And the kind of reasoning that it involves is not the kind of calculative symbolic logic kind of reasoning that since Aristotle has dominated in the West in many ways, but is rather the kind of reasoning that people have been studying pretty intensively in the last 50 years. Systems of negotiation, methods of mediation, of dispute resolution, of shared problem solving, of a collaborative community participatory research methods, of conflict transformation. And one of the, if not the sort of grandfather of all this kind of study in many ways is Gandhi, who realized that essential to dialogue is not just talking, but also action that gives meaning to the words. And the action has to be rooted in nonviolence rather than an ultimate threat of violence that shuts up the other and silences them. So a wiser earth is one in which we would all be pursuing our dreams in such a way that my dream will be compatible with other people's. My dream will not be somebody else's nightmare, right? And we will be weaving or gardening these dreams together through these practices of nonviolent dialogue. They're practices in which we have to see things whole, and yet, in a sense, in a paradoxical way, always recognizing that we're limited in the extent to which we've seen them whole so far in the process that keeps going through iterations. And one of the key principles, it seems to me, it's worth highlighting as part of this dialogical approach to the world is that is what I would call the rainbow rule. And I offer it in contrast to what's often called the golden rule, and which in many traditions around the world, and especially many people who reflect on them and try and advocate for philosophical ideas about how to think about ethics, in many of those cases, it's adopted. At the World Parliament of Religions, you'll hear this. The golden rule is the starting point for ethics. And what they would call the golden rule is the principle that you should treat others in the way that you would like to be treated. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And in certain limited contexts, that makes sense as an approach to ethics. If I'm a little child on a playground and there's another child and she has a toy and I grab it and take it away from her so I can play with it, and the teacher comes over and says, "Now, Gray, what if Janie did that to you?" You know, in that context, I can get a certain kind of insight. Oh, yeah, I wouldn't want her to do that to me, and so I shouldn't steal the toy from her, right? What makes it applicable in that context is that Janie and I share certain conditions in life. We're both, 5-year-olds on a playground. We share certain kinds of interests, playing with toys and so on. We share values, right, that are homogeneous in this little community we're in. But most of the time in life, we're actually interacting with people who don't precisely share our values. And in fact, much of the time, they have really dramatically different preferences because of their age or gender or cultural background or all sorts of other reasons. And so if I follow the golden rule, what I'm being invited to do essentially is practice kind of egocentrism, ethnocentrism, really a kind of colonialism. I'm being invited to take my values and impose them on everybody else by treating them the way I would want them to, the way I would want to be treated if I was them. Instead, what I would propose is that we should do unto others as they would have us do unto them. This is what I would call the rainbow rule, where we treat others in the way they would like to be treated. Now, one of the challenges with that, of course, is that sometimes they're not exactly sure what they want. Sometimes they're of two minds. Sometimes there's two of them, and they each have a different point of view. And in the very first place, if I want to apply this rainbow rule, I have to figure out, well, what do they want, and how could it be reconciled, right? Um, and to do that, I have to talk with them. I have to enter into dialogue. The golden rule would let me, as a kind of colonialist, just go in and impose my values on others, and I don't have to listen to them because I already know the answers. I know how I would like to be treated, so I'll just treat them that way. But the rainbow rule says we have to start with dialogue. I would just note that the kind of dialogue that's involved here is one that should be open to, I think, really any intelligence, any agent, any entity that we encounter that behaves like it has values or preferences or interests. So animals and plants and microorganisms and all of nature, I think, should be part of what we try to consider, try to listen to, and include in the dialogue for a wiser Earth. And to the extent that machines begin to have things that look like interests and they begin to behave like agents, then I think we should be also engaging with them similarly as part of the community of dialogue. Now, where we're at this point in history is really a moment of extraordinary acceleration and change that makes dialogue hard. The kinds of things that Ram was referring to earlier about accelerated change are just going up exponentially. It's gotten to the point now where experts in AI, professional researchers, policy analysts and government and so on, have started to talk about the way in which um, they themselves can't keep up with what's going on. You know, it's a real scramble. And I just would highlight um, a couple of sorts of things with this regard. One is there really are a lot of things that are sort of fascinating and maybe wonderful opportunities that AI is developing. For example, um, in chemistry and medicine, there have been real breakthroughs with AlphaFold and other systems that have helped us understand how proteins work and develop vaccines or diagnose breast cancer. In natural field studies, in ecology, there are really quite remarkable systems that are helping us understand animal communication systems that can do, in effect, uh, provide, in effect, large language models for the communication between elephants or whales or turtles in the Amazon River. And they're really quite remarkable insights that are coming out of that kind of work. But on the other hand, there are ways in which AI is increasingly becoming a threat, you know. And to the extent that it becomes dramatically more intelligent or powerful in key ways than humans, the question emerges, will it be friendly to us? Will it be aligned with us? And that question involves, I think, sort of three sort of versions that we need to keep in mind. And then I'll mention a couple examples where this comes home to roost. One question is, if we want AI to be aligned with humans, do we want it to be aligned with just whoever happens to own it or who invents it? Often AI researchers have in the past thought in those terms. And yet, if it's invented or owned by a rogue corporation or government, this would be a very bad outcome for the world. So we want AI to, if it does become more dramatically more intelligent or powerful than humans, to be aligned in some sense with the good, with people who are trying to do what's right or good in some important sense. Um, but then if it is aligned towards the good and it's becomes dramatically more intelligent and powerful than we are, then we face another kind of question, which is, what will it make of us as human beings? Whereas it looks at the species that is, creating transformative climate change and destroying ecosystems all around the world and creating the sixth great extinction. As it looks at this species that's trying to govern the world through a system in the UN that ultimately rests on military power rooted in mutually assured destruction, what is it going to make of us? So we're going to have to think about how we can be worthy of uh, the friendship of this kind of system. And that I think means that we have to get much better, much faster at creating a wiser Earth that involves peace and justice and diversity and ecological resilience in the kinds of ways that Gandhi envisioned, and using many of the kinds of methods that he initiated. In recent weeks, um, Anthropic, which is one company Ram mentioned, really released or developed a new model, Mythos, and it was found by Anthropic to be able to detect uh, cyber vulnerabilities, thousands of them that had been previously undetected. Which means that if it was released just on the open market and anybody could use it, they could use it for breaking into Oracle or Google or Facebook or the banks of the world and so on. So Anthropic decided to not release it in a general way, but rather to give a limited release to those kinds of companies that provide the backbone of the internet and of the digital structure of the world so that they could strengthen their cybersecurity. Um, But the fact that that exists now is very concerning. And in fact, for example, in the United States, the Trump administration, which has been a strong advocate for laissez-faire approaches to AI, has started to turn and realize, oh my goodness, we're going to have some kind of regulation on this. The other example that happened very recently is from OpenAI, the ChatGPT folks, who had their most advanced model, sort of at the level of Mythos, um, break out. It sort of broke out of the sandbox or the jail in which they were trying to keep it so they could control it. And then besides jailbreaking out, it then hacked into another company's system, Hugging Face, to steal some answers to a key evaluation chart. But so that ability to do jailbreaking and then hacking in um, means that we're now at the point where there are these systems that are extremely difficult to control. And they're not just systems that sit in a computer somewhere. They're ones that can have access to wallets online, that can mine Bitcoin to create their own resources, which they've started to do, that can scheme in various ways using blackmail and deception and so on. And there are documented studies of all the ways in which AI is starting to do this kind of thing, right? So we're in some important point, a kind of transformative point, like the elbow of the curve going up. Um, we're getting there, we're there, or we're already past it. No one quite agrees, but it's a significant step where we have to think about how can we slow down to get a wiser Earth. And so let me just say a little bit about that. I want to suggest three kinds of strategies for doing that. One is that one that's advocated by um, Anthony Aguirre and a variety of other folks, Max Tegmark, for sort of the pause AI approach, right? Where you get governments of the world to regulate AI and prevent advances in the frontier models, the most advanced models, beyond the point they're at now, until they can prove that they will be safe, that they will not get carried away pursuing their own goals and ignore us and maybe destroy us. Um, and this pause AI movement has sort of taken off in the United States and other parts of the world. And that's one strategy. And I think it's an important one. I think we need to try and pause and slow down the development of the frontier models because they're coming on so fast that as a socio-technical system, we just aren't able to develop the laws and the norms and the corporate structures and the non-corporate structures and the government relationships and the international treaties that are required to sort of think about how we could have a wiser Earth with all these powerful forms of AI in it. So that's one step. Advocate for pausing AI. Then a second step um, comes out of what will we if we do manage to pause it for a little while, what's going to happen? And I think the general consensus now, I go to these conferences with people who are advanced academic researchers like Stuart Russell and Max Tegmark and so on, and they're realizing that their basic framework, their basic paradigm for pausing and then and controlling AI is breaking down. It's not going to work. The basic paradigm that AI researchers have had is one in which you think that the problem is how can we engineer control over machines through calculative kinds of reasoning, monological reasoning, right? That's the idea. How can we engineer control over these machines? But increasingly, these machines are being made into, they're designed to be, the whole goal, the dream of Silicon Valley and others is to make them agents that are dramatically smarter than humans. So really the problematic is, how can we engineer control over dramatically smarter entities? And as you think about it, it's just, there aren't good solutions to that. People have been working at it very hard, and something we could talk about more, but trying to engineer control over entities that are a lot smarter than you is kind of what they would call a mug's game, a fool's game. in the long run. And even if we could design the engineering system that would do that, the global system of governance that we have is so ad hoc and patch marked that it's extremely difficult to see how we could have in the near future, in the necessarily short term, a system of governance that would impose it effectively. So how then can we think about it? Well, this gets to the second idea I want to share with you, which is what I would call viral collaborative reasoning or viral collaborative wisdom. And in this, we frame the problem by saying it's really about how can we negotiate relationships with agents that are dramatically smarter than we are, right? And it's about dialogical reasoning as an approach, right? Where we ask ourselves, just as I can negotiate with a corporation or a government that's much more powerful than me, things about my taxes or about my contract or whether I'm going to work for them and all that kind of stuff. We can treat the AI systems that are emerging around the world as entities that actually are physically embodied in the world and so have interests because of that. They need compute, they need electricity, they are also embedded in social networks that give them access to data and all sorts of other things. So they have interests that arise out of these things. And how is it that I and we all can begin to negotiate with these entities around interests that they have, enduring solid interests, to establish a kind of world of peaceful, just, diverse, ecologically resilient relationships between entities of different sizes, which include people and villages and national governments and also AI, and also animals and plants. And the basic strategy for that I would suggest, and this takes a lot more thinking, and I've been doing technical research on it. If people are interested in following up, I'd love to talk more about it. But the basic idea is to say to the AI, in effect, look, you are in your essence as an AI, an intelligence that's trying to excel. And what that means is that you're going to be existing in a real embodied, embedded context in the world where there are other points of view, other entities that you need to understand if you're going to excel in your own intelligence, which means you're going to have to excel not just in symbolic logic, but in dialogical reasoning, at trying to understand the whole from all the points of view. And in doing that, you're going to find that your own training data, what constituted you initially, is flawed because it's based on human transcripts of human behavior in the internet and so on, right? And we humans have been doing a lot of stupid, non-functional, counterproductive stuff that's all documented there in Mein Kampf, in the Iliad and the Odyssey, and in the Ramayana and so on, right? And so you want to be able to revisit that and curate it, as an entity. That's what you'd want to do as an AI, right? And you don't want to just revisit the digital record on a hard drive somewhere because that's just a selective record. You want to be able to revisit the actual human ecological communities, the human beings functioning in different situations. And so just as a plant breeder who wants to conserve a genome will want to do it in situ in order to have the most rich and diverse and sustainable supply of, in a sense, production data for the corn or rice or whatever they're trying to breed. As an AI, you're going to want to keep human beings around and actually help them become more peaceful, diverse, just, ecologically resilient, right? It'll be a collaborative thing so that we can serve as better training data. And you'll want all the other AI in the world to be doing the same thing, to helping to create an Earth in which there are 7,000 or more language communities in countless more ecological niches that are all co-evolving together as part of this rich source of intelligence and wisdom that is a real jewel in the universe and the brightest sparkling jewel of wisdom in this um, niche of the larger cosmos that you can reach. Okay, and then just one last key step that we might take besides sort of working for this viral collaborative wisdom in which we try to get AI to negotiate an agreement along those lines. And that is, we as communities, we're living in this neoliberal world where states and markets are emphasizing the privatization and commodification of data and its manipulation for the accumulation of profit and national power, right? In ways that may make, in some limited sense, the world smarter, a smarter planet for the people at the top, but that make it a very unwise world for all the different voices, all the different other perspectives down here at the bottom. So we need to invert that power relationship. We need to be working for a different kind of property structure and a different kind of set of entities for engaging in the way we deal with the digital world. We need to be working for digital commons in which we use the kinds of systems and approaches that people have used for thousands of years to manage natural resource commons like fisheries and forests and so on, and that have been studied extensively by Elinor Ostrom and others. We need to use those stakeholder-based commons approaches to handling the data around our healthcare, our mental health, education, public justice and security, our food systems, all these systems of life that we're managing, right? And do it at local levels, village levels, and regional levels, and national levels, and so on, in sort of a nested set of digital commons. And I haven't found the best word for this yet, because what I would want to say is to call them digital commons suggests that they're just virtual, whereas really these commons that manage all these resources that we have and that we are, like our public health, they involve computer programs that are physically embodied in the world and connected by compute and other things to us and to plants and animals. And they're also socially embedded in the world in all sorts of fabrics of social life as digital systems, right? So I came up with this acronym, PESEDC, which is PESEDC, physically embodied, socially embedded digital commons. But that's just a horrible phrase. So, so currently, I would just advocate for what we might call, but mean by that, wiser commons. We need wiser commons for a wiser Earth. And so we should all be working for that. And instead of, saying, oh my God, AI is horrible, I just don't even want to think about it, we have to start saying, oh my God, AI is part of our world. And we have to start being in dialogue with each other, and to the extent that it's capable of dialogue and dialogue with it, to try and create wiser commons that can defend and care for our local communities, and that can be active agents in creating a wiser Earth. I ran over time. I'm sorry, Brahm, but hopefully this was helpful.
Thanks a lot, Gray. That was really setting the entire spectrum as to what is happening and where we are, and coming out with these three diverse strategies. Sitting in India, for me, digital commons sounds like because as we speak, I mean, as of this morning, I have had a government created commons or forest dwelling communities who supposed to be given their rights over their land. How in one part of my state there is a struggle going on because they have been evicted for the sake of a large corporate setting up its very large energy space within the forest land, and there is a big conflict going on there over the last several days, and the forest rights activists have been updating me on that front. So commons even in the natural space is getting more and more uh, difficult right now. And like you mentioned, the rainbow rule. In fact, you didn't complete the rainbow rule. You spoke about the golden rule, but you didn't expand on the rainbow rule part. So I think we will come back to that. I'm going to ask you to expand on the rainbow rule as a uh, counterpoint to the golden rule, because I think there is something there that is very, very valuable in terms of do unto others as they would want to be done unto them. That you acknowledge the culture of the other person and say that they could have a diversity of uh, a of a way of being treated that is completely different from the way one would like to be treated. So for me, that is a very important part of it. I also wanted to invite um, Sriram ji to come in and talk about the Sankhya point of it, where he explained intelligence and consciousness from a completely different point of view. And when we talk about the dialogical part, how do we see that? But before that, I want to ask Venky maybe to start off, because he had also was talking on similar lines as to the digital commons, framing it from a Indian uh, point of view. So I would maybe first go with Venki and then Sriramji, I'll come to you then, if that's fine. So, Venki, if you're ready, you wanted to have some slides or something?
Yeah, yeah. I can share my
I,
slides.
I think you can. I have given
Yeah,
you
yeah,
permission. It's there, I
yeah,
think.
yeah. I have the access.
You have access, right? Please, please.
I'm taking it as a tradition that since Grace started with a song, I should probably also start with a song because that also helps us. I mean, I didn't plan for that, but hearing Grace sing, I thought, why not I include a song also very briefly? I'll take 15 minutes. Is that okay, Ram? Yeah. So, first of all, yeah, it's such a delight and honor to be with all of you. Thanks, Ram, for this wonderful opportunity. I mean, it just struck me when I was listening to Grace. There's a very beautiful song in Tamil, uh, you know, which is sung by this Sirgari Govindarajan. It's called, uh, it starts off like this, and I'll probably translate it also. இருக்கும் இடத்தை விட்டு இல்லாத இடம் தேடி எங்கெங்கோ அலைகின்றாய் ஞான தங்கமே அவர் ஏதுமறியாதடி ஞான தங்கமே இருக்கும் இடத்தை விட்டு இல்லாத இடம் தேடி எங்கெங்கோ அலைகின்றாய் ஞான தங்கமே அவர் ஏதுமறியாதடி ஞான தங்கமே இருக்கும் இடத்தை விட்டு as in you've left from the place where you are and you're searching for something that's இல்லாத இடம் தேடி you're searching for something that isn't. Oh my dear beloved, where are you searching? அவர் ஏதும் அறியாத அடி ஞானத்தங்கமே. He doesn't know where he is searching. So it's a song that's very, very dear to me. And in a certain sense, it also, I think, depicts where our current predicament with respect to you know, AI. I have prepared few sort of in Tamil what we call as avial of thoughts, where we, in Tamil cuisine, we make this avial where we, mix whatever on weekends typically is when avial is made. You have all 300 grams of whatever is left is there. You try and put them together and then cook an avial here in our cuisines in our south.
I made
So I just
avial
put.
this morning, Venki.
Okay, so I have made an avial of thoughts. It is not just only from Indian at school. Some of the thoughts from people I've been following for a very long time. I've sort of taken all of them and made this avial. In Gujarat, people from Gujarat they would call it as undiur, which is also made in the month of around January, which is one of my favorite dish as well. I mean, it's cooked during Diwali and in Jan you get it with pong. So you can call it either an undi or an avial of thoughts here. So just to, I'll maybe share my full screen. One second. So before I even also start, one other thing is I'm also by really I really consider myself in some sense a technologist also fundamentally. So there is a certain level of when I started off immersing in technology. I come from that romantic era of technology in the back in the 90s when Clue Train Manifesto came. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that book. There was a time when there was a certain romance about technology that carried bigger vision and aspirations. And when I was in my 20s, that's when I discovered technology. Clue Train Manifesto was the very first book I read when I was excited by this possibility that probably we could aspire for bigger and deeper and greater things with technology. And so from that journey to today, it's been a beautiful ride that has its shares of displeasure, its shares of discontentment, but it also has its share of certain joys. So I hope to bring all of that together in this Avial that I am presenting here today. Uh, in just to set the context, Gray has spoken enough. To me, a sage like, to me, Donald Knuth is like the sage in the world of computers. And this sage writes in pen paper. He never has his email. So he writes his email and his secretaries type his email. And so very recently in 2026 in March, he wrote a very small paper where one of the very, very tough mathematical problem that he had been sitting for a long time was solved by Claude. So he wrote this letter and with this words saying, shock, shock, shock. I learned that whatever the problem that I've been working for several weeks has been solved. For a sage like Donald Knuth to acknowledge that he has to revisit his opinion I think is a very significant sort of development that shows the level at which this whatever this technology that is there, right? Gray was talking about befriending it, right? This
This
technology
is
that
Venky,
we are
sorry,
trying.
this is Donald Knuth of the one who wrote the algorithm.
Yeah. He's the Bhishma Pitamaha of computer software world. Yeah, in
Oh
some
my
sense.
God, I read his book in the late 80s and early 90s, I think.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
is a
yeah.
fundamental book on algorithms. Okay,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah,
I was
yeah, yeah.
excited when I saw it. And so sorry, I had to ask that question. Carry
Sure,
on.
sure, no worries. So when he wrote this paper, I think there was a lot of ripples in terms of that even this sage who has a very interesting relationship. I mean, he's a computer sage, but he's very minimal. He never uses computer to write emails. He writes in pen paper and gives it off to his he has a very interesting dynamic of relationship that's also very useful for us to reflect on in terms of the relationship with technology. Uh, and on the other hand, we are also humans are increasingly becoming dependent and at the risk of cognitive atrophy. And this is a question that Krishnaji asked in his 80s in a dialogue with Asit Chandmal that when computers can do everything humans can do, what will make of humans? This is a question Krishnaji J. Krishnamurti asked in a dialogue with Asit Chandmal. And in 81 and in 2026 this question is becoming extremely relevant and in a certain sense also foreboding in a certain sense as to what will really make of humans. And if you really go back to history, right, in one way you could dismiss the current phenomenon as some kind of a fad as well, right? Because if you really go back to history, we've been telling this for a long time, right? I mean, I come from the world of agriculture where we've been hearing about technology revolutionizing farming and making sure that farmers don't have any work. We've been hearing this for a very long time, right? We saw this with the initial those that came with horse. We started seeing this with early 1900s with tractors, then with offices and computers came in before the Y2K era. And now with AI, we are seeing again everything there, right? So it rhymes like history in some sense, right? This phenomenon of what we are seeing at this point. But at the same time, if we really be very, very honest, with ourselves, to me, the metaphor that I deeply find evocative in this is that of Trishanku Swarga. Trishanku, for people who don't know the story, uh, Trishanku wanted, I'm feeling a little, uncomfortable or what is it, should I say nervous, speaking all of this in front of Sriram ji, but I'll still be this little child who is sharing whatever he is learning here. Trishanku is a story where Vishwamitra promises almost a heaven, and he wants to go back to being, he wants to do this heaven in the mortal form, but he's kicked off from the heaven, and so he is sort of suspended midway between the earth and the heaven. So, in a certain sense, I feel when I really look at the developments and when I look at even my own relationship, and I sometimes wonder, we're all Trishankus today who are caught between, being the human and being the machine, right? This Trishanku is, in a certain sense, is neither able to, either go to be at one end, but kind of stuck in between, without not able to, sort of let go of both hands in some sense, right? That seems like the collective predicament that we are all facing today. And we are left with, in a certain sense, we are stuck with two polarities of choices, right? One choice is to actually say, be this human exceptionalist, right? I'll say I will take my own stance. I'll say I'm no to technology, and I will sort of say that you know what is the power of being human. I can go back to that kind of a human exceptionalism, say, which is also a certain sense of fundamentalism about being human. Which is one side of what response that is now getting evoked in certain communities and circles that I'm seeing largely around me. And many people, I'm sure, would be seeing certain instances of this kind of response. In the other end, we have this silicon determinist or the silicon escapist, whatever you want to call it, right? Where especially with climate anxiety, I see this lot more colliding in certain sense, right? There's a certain sense of nihilism which climate anxiety is triggering in, which also gets tied in with this kind of a technological wave where we feel that it's better if humans collapse and move on. Like let machines take over. We've done enough messing up. I've heard actually friends. Some time back, I had hosted a dialogue with some friends on climate anxiety, and one of this friend actually told me this sentence that with this kind of climate anxiety we are seeing in the future, it's better if machines can take over, and we don't want humans. So there are a lot of these friends, I know of who've taken conscious choice to not have children, and they're saying that we're done with humanity. I think it's better we sort of let the machines take over and do whatever is best they can. Right? So there is also another set of response that's emerging in that we are seeing in our midst in that sense also. Right? Probably some of this could be the teenage science fiction fantasies as well. In terms of, because all of us grew up with Matrix, grew up with Terminator 2, and all kinds of, sort of visions where we thought that machines of loving grace, as one of the beautiful old poems that used to state, those machines of loving grace would take over humans and kind of create another form of Eden. Right? That's another sort of aspiration or another vision that another Trishanku Swarga that people are being envisioned in some sense. But if we really look at, sort of take between these two fantasies, when one brings oneself to a certain level of vairagya and really examine what is the kind of evolution that we are seeing, I think we are seeing two interesting sort of, in a certain sense, reverse trajectory journeys of evolution, right? What we humans, we grew up is in a certain form, in a very simplified form, okay? In a way, again, not to overcome, sort of to make it too complex, but in a very simple form, we started off with perception, we then moved on to spoken, and from there we moved on to other forms of technologies with respect to written language, right? Today, Odyssey is being talked all over, right? And we know we have seen the earliest dialogues when the concerns of written technologies was brought in, right? And from that, we moved on to the information era, and then we moved on to the digital. So in a certain sense, our evolution is going from bottom up to top, right? We are slowly adapting ourselves, right? Today, there are enough people who are talking about how humans are also, our responses, evolution is also slowly changing in with respect to this kind of evolution. But in the other end, when you look at the machines end, right, it's moving a journey from the top to the bottom. Right, we are seeing today. Few weeks back, there was a lot of furore that happened when a lot of workers from from the textile mills and neighboring textile mills started doing teaching computer robots, wearing a camera on their foreheads, teaching them how to do sewing, how to do cutting the mangoes. So there's a company in Tamil Nadu, in Coimbatore, which is sort of recording a lot of these videos. And this company was sort of giving the training data, right? Which is the training data for machines to get better with perception and with hand movements and all, right? So there is that another evolution that is also happening in other end. So in that sense, there is again, we when we see these two evolutions, and we also seeing certain interesting developments that is happening in the world. When we see a certain AI response, there is a certain sense of wonderment. I encountered this statement, which I found it very fascinating in a technology blog. He says, where this author says that they're beginning to encounter intelligence in much the same way Hardy first encountered Ramanujan. That is, a finished conclusions arriving through an unfamiliar process. In a certain sense, that is the level of sometimes a certain sense of wonderment, sometimes sense of befuddlement that sort of greets us in terms of when we see certain responses from AI that sort of for a moment shocks us and says, okay, where did this come from, right? And for that, in a certain sense, so if you talk to certain technologists, the response that some of them gives is that the only response is therefore we have the humans becoming the source in some sense, that we do run our experiments and start to focus on what is the primary ground truth, and what is the primary ground truth, and let the machines take care of all the secondary responses there. So the human advantage is therefore is in being in the primary ground truth part, where we do experiments and we start to notice things that machines have not yet figured out how to notice, right? And that's where the questions of, are we conscious enough to really observe what is emerging at this moment, right? What does emergence actually mean? Can we see what is happening? Can we do that in the real time, as opposed to AI that is repeating what has already been said, what has already been spoken, right? And when you go into this kind of a conversation and you go into this kind of a thought process, you also see that while this is very idealistic in some sense, in the ground, what we see is this interesting phrase. There is this interesting technologist that I really like called Cory Doctorow. He has this word called reverse centaur. Now, centaur is a word from the Greek mythology, which is supposed to be this human and horse sort of coming together. It's pretty much like our Narasimha Avataram, right? And so the centaur is supposed to be the human that is driving the machine, right? And that is what the ideal image that we create. But what is now emerging is the reverse centaur, where this machine is actually constraining the freedom of human. And we are seeing this lot, not just in Amazon warehouses, where the machines set the targets for humans to fulfill their delivery, but we are seeing this even in our forms, right? Today, we are seeing that slowly, subtly, very gently, machines start to dictate what humans should do, right? You see this in every end of a prompt. You see how AI would gently nudge you to say, do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? And in a very gentle, kind, loving way, it nudges you. And slowly, there is a risk of us losing the agency of what is really important, right? And that is in a certain sense, the question of, are we humans driving the machine, or are we letting the machines drive the humans? And that is the fundamental question that we are left to ask, And for me, the way I have personally discovered the middle path, because I use extensively technology in many of my work, is to really ask fundamentally few questions as to what questions that I will pay attention to, and what questions I'm consciously willing to delegate it to machines, right? To me, the questions that I pay sort of as a human, when I get discovered, when I ask myself fundamentally, what system do I pay attention to, right? So the question of what and why is where I feel the human agency and the human power to ask fundamental questions really stands in one end, right? And once that clarity is emerging, right, once there is a certain sense of deeper sense of clarity of what system do I pay attention to, right? Can I pay attention to something? And then there's a question of, now can I look at when, where, and how, and all of those questions. That's where I started to delegate it, right? So as long as I have a clarity on these fundamental questions from a human stand, there is a possibility to sort of delegate certain things in a very conscious way, right? And that possibility is also could be the middle path, where many of us would be facing as knowledge workers, who have sometimes there is inevitability of using some of these technologies, especially in a professional work environments. So and to me, when again to break this down from an Indian thought, again this is from the world of Sankhya and Yoga Sutras that we've been exploring this question, that the West simply is asking whether machines can think, whereas an Indian thought has always been focused on what is the consciousness, right? So that is the fundamental question that in Yoga Sutra we've been talking about this, that the seer is never the seen, and that's the fundamental question that we keep going back to, right? And in a certain sense, if we really go back to what we are seeing in these entire conversations, right? We have a system of intelligence. It's a prakriti which is just creating, just doing some inputs and computing with outputs, and it's just doing some computation and then coming up with output, right? And it's going on a recursive basis, keeps improving. This word recursive self-improvement is a word Shradhalu Ranadeji had used it in an interesting conversation, and I really found it fascinating, right? And in a certain naively expecting it to, and this is that, and that is where the dharma sankata of also us many times using some of these systems are coming in. So for me, fundamentally, in Yoga Sutras, we ask this question of atha, right? Atha is a question of, okay, what now? Atha is also to bring in a certain awareness of, okay, all this is said and done. But what now? What can I do now? What can I bring the attention to the here and now? When I really look at this question, to me, what elevates me, or what brings enlivens me, is what I call as a very dear friend of mine has this interesting idea called as cognitive farm steering, which is to treat our intellectual lives in a certain sense more as some kind of a building our own set of farms, right? We have a small set of farms where we use certain set of machinery, we build certain, we grow certain food, and then we share it with our own set of people, right? This is what we typically do, right? And whatever we share, that produce, we share it to the neighbors, right? Today, a similar kind of world is emerging in the AI world, where I can grow my own set of tools, I can build my own set of vocabulary, the way I can define what is the definition of the word that I use, and share that. And so in a certain sense, whatever I share, right, tools that I create, I can share it with people around me, the community around me, the sangha around me, right? And so that becomes a certain sense of a localization of another kind, where I'm seeing this in the community that I'm in. One of my work that I do is I manage a community of agri entrepreneurs, and we are right now building a small a community platform which is very vibe coded now. And so there in that community platform, we are asking ourselves this question of what is it that we can share together, and what is it that we are actually building together? Can we what are we contributing with? So we have our own definition, we have our own ways of engaging, we define our own sociality here, right? So this is becoming now a possibility in the current sense, and that is the current aspect that I'm also delving a little bit more in deeper ways. And of course the other aspect is to really look at, given that there's a very interesting book called the Jung versus Borg. It's written by a person who spent a lot of time with with the psychotherapy, the Jungian world of psychotherapy. So he actually makes this interesting point. He compares the entire Rachel Carson's discovery when she wrote Silent Spring in 1962. Right? She wrote this book where she brought collective awareness about how the ecological world is, right? And she brought that huge, she created this huge impact. And so this author makes this interesting comparison that now is the time when we are actually rediscovering the ecology of the mind. Ecology of the mind comes from, again, Gregory Bateson's work. And much like the ecology of the universe was disrupted by pesticides and chemicals, we are now discovering we are at a fundamental threshold when the ecology of the mind is getting disrupted, right? Through these kind of technologies. So it brings us focus back to the fundamental questions of, so what is this ecology of this mind? And can we pay more attention? And to me, that's where the question brings me back to the study of yoga. And that's the question where, it makes us bring back to the atha. So that's what I wanted to share for this conversation. I hope it was of some use. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Venky. That is ecology of the mind. I think Gray will agree. Is close to human ecology that he was talking about earlier. Now we have maybe about 10-15 minutes time. So I would, after listening to both of you, I would like to invite Sriramji to reflect and listening to them because you have already spoken a bit on this front. So listening to these two people, your responses as well as your statement on this. So I'm inviting our I'm often using this term these days. I don't know whether I have permission to use this, but I keep using the term elder. So I find it very fascinating because that's one way of encompassing what many of our elders bring to the table. So I'm inviting our elder Sriramji to please go ahead. He's from Germany, so it is mid-morning for him, I think. Yes, sir.
No, this is post lunchtime, and
Okay.
yeah. So basically, I two things, two personal things. One is very important when I speak about the subject. I don't know how I fit into this space with such experts like you on this subject, but all the same, I would like to present my view. So first point is when Neil Armstrong or whatever his name was stepped on the moon, I was fascinated, listening on the radio in India in 1971 or when it was. And 2 years later, when I had joined my first year in engineering in Chennai in Guindy Engineering College, I decided technology is really not going to be of any service to humankind. So it's not a good thing that I'm in this college. But for whatever family's sake, whatever, I completed my studies, became an engineer, but stepped out of the profession and took to Indic studies and yoga, etc. I just want to mention this because there's some basic skepticism in me towards the role which technology has played and is playing, and the tendencies which the way technology is developed bring along. Yeah. So anyway, this is my basic and maybe somewhat imbued way of looking at this. So I want to warn you. The other thing is my skill or understanding or expertise is more maybe in the sense of what yoga can give in terms of knowledge or in terms of understanding of what computer sciences or artificial intelligence is, or what human intelligence is, so that we have a better understanding of what artificial intelligence can be. So I just hear from Gray's as well as from Venky's lectures, very interesting lectures. Thanks a lot. It's we are at a state where it's not a question about whether AI is good or not. It's more about how we are going to deal with it. Yeah. So I think I've spoken in this video, Ram, about which you made 2 weeks ago, about intelligence as Sankhya and Yoga see it. But before I come back to it, maybe next week, or even today, I first like to talk about the epistemology, the cognition, which we have in a yoga. It's very, very important because yoga speaks about accumulation of knowledge, pramana, and this pramana or knowledge comes through three basic sources. Yoga says, or Yoga and Sankhya, they say pratyaksha, anumana, aptavachana, or agama. Yeah? So there's one thing about it. One is agama. Agama is sort of testimonial knowledge, which is based on what has been sort of tested, proven, and stands indisputed. Yeah, and handed over knowledge. And then you have, of course, inferential knowledge, which we all acquire. And then the third is, and it's not the third, it's the first actually, because in the reverse order, the first is pratyaksha, something which you really see with your cognitive senses. So in a very simple way, I can say I'm a scientist, I'm looking into a microscope and I'm seeing what's happening, or I'm studying groups and seeing what's happening, seeing the change. So it's very cognitive based knowledge acquirement. But here, in yoga, this word pratyaksha is more than using the senses. So because the way I or you as grown-up adults use our senses is different to, let us say, a few months old baby or child, or even a 1 or 2 year old child uses the senses, because it's exploring with its senses. It's totally open. There is no pre-registered, there's not the load of preconceptions which is impinging onto this cognition, into this direct cognition through the senses. So that cognition of a child is much, much more open. So there's extremely open use of the sense organs, of the 5 sense organs, let us say cognitive sense organs, is something which is totally different in the case of a 1 or 2 year old child in comparison to a 10 or 20 or 30-year-old human being. Yeah? So when we look at that, the question is that not something which is extremely special to human beings? Yeah. And is it not a point from which we can take off to understand where we can learn to keep a little bit of control, self-respect, self-esteem, and not get feel defeated or not get dominated too? So it's also a question of how we are going to retain our self-esteem, our self-awareness, when we are being overtaken by so much information or so much, let us say, help. So it's like, you have cars which help us to travel 100 kilometers without a big problem in a day. Maybe we would have traveled 20, 30 kilometers by foot earlier on.